Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming to our Global Korea lecture, exploring both the Korean world and the UK-Korea diplomatic relations in defense. This year marks the 130th anniversary of diplomatic relations between Korea and the UK, as well as the 60th anniversary of the Armistice Treaty. Among the various ceremonies commemorating the bravery and sacrifice of the British Korean veterans 6 decades ago, the last Veterans Parade will take place next week on the 11th of July between Horse Guard and Westminster. I encourage you all to watch and support the parade if you can. On this note, I'm very happy to introduce to you our speakers for this evening, Major General Swindle, the President of BKVA, and Captain Park, the Defense Attaché at the Embassy of Republic of Korea. We are extremely honored that Major General Swindle has accepted our request to speak this evening, and we are looking forward to sharing with you his experiences as a young officer serving in Korea. Major General Swindle will explore the Korean world and also give us a glimpse of some of his personal experiences before looking at the friendship between Korea and the veterans now. South Korea was able to rebuild our nation from the ashes because we had allies who were willing to put their lives on the line to defend our country. We are forever grateful to all these men and women who fought for our freedom. The United Kingdom has a loyal friend, as it did not only help us in times of need, but also allowed us to build a long-term partnership between our nations. Captain Park will give us an overview of the security environment, the current military threats, the defense policies adopted by South Korea, and its commitment to the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Captain Park finally focused on the diplomatic relations between Korea and the UK in matters of security, information exchange, and defense. There will be, of course, the time for questions at the end. Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to welcome our first speaker here this evening, our dear friend, Major General Swindle.
I'm allowed 30 minutes and I must overrun, so my watch is here. I will be talking on a serious subject in a fairly light-hearted manner, which I hope you'll excuse. My introduction is very much on the lines of Mr. Yoon's. You've invited me to give a talk here this evening in a year which marks 2 anniversaries, 130 years of friendship between Korea and the United Kingdom, and 60 years since the ceasefire which ended the Korean War. I've been tremendously helped by Hu Young Han and Paul Wadey, who've helped me get together my pictures, which I hope will help me put over my message. The director of this cultural centre, Mr. Kam Soon Kim, has allowed me to spend time with his staff sorting out what's coming. I'm delighted to be paired with my friend Captain Park. We met each other actually on, I think, the 27th of July last year, when Captain Park was up with the Korean veterans at the National Arboretum, marking the anniversary of the ceasefire, which we in the BKVA do every year in Staffordshire at the Arboretum. I feel I'm amongst friends in the audience, but I'm daunted by possible, well, certainly a lot of expertise on Korean matters, so please forgive me if I get dates wrong. In my time, I'll try to set the scene by a simple overview of the course of the 3-year Korean War, describe how my own regiment prepared for war, describe our arrival on the Korean Peninsula in December 1951, give an overview of our time in Korea in 1952, and then a little bit about Korea then and now and the contrast. The miracle on the hand, friendship shown, gratitude shown, and on our side, pride in a distant obligation we think honourably discharged. So, rather simplistically, if I can start off with my pictures. We're off. Now, a very simplistic map. Just left of the E in Europe is Great Britain, and Korea is marked on the right. How do you get there? Well, you go now by Korean Airways, or now British Airways, in about 10, 12 hours. It took us 5 weeks by troop ship to get there, and I'll just show that map to emphasize that. We then go on, we hope. Well, it was working beautifully before. When we tried it out, it went click, click, click.
That one, just reset it.
Well, a simple map of Korea. I don't think we need to linger on that. The 38th parallel. Korea under Japanese rule, 1910 to 1945. Harsh colonial masters. August 1945, 2 atomic bombs on Japan. Stalin very keen to expand eastwards, and quite soon, from 1945, there was a strong Soviet army in North Korea. The artificial 38th parallel having been drawn between various meetings between the Soviet Union and the United States of America and the United Nations. Totally artificial line dividing North and South Korea. South Korea supported militarily by the United States of America. The Korean War. We show here the situation 2 days after North Korea attacked across the dividing line on the 27th of June. American and South Korean forces deployed in the Pusan perimeter, being heavily attacked by superior Russian-equipped troops, North Koreans with Soviet advisors with them. Lieutenant General Walton Walker of the United States Army fighting a very difficult battle in the perimeter. Then the call went out for aid by the United Nations. It was working beautifully before. I'm not doing it hard enough. Of course, America was strongly in South Korea, and throughout the war, America were the dominant partners in support of South Korea. But the British Commonwealth countries came in, answered the call of the United Nations, Australia, Canada, India, South Africa, and the United Kingdom. Other troops produced by Belgium, Colombia, Ethiopia, France, Greece, Luxembourg, Netherlands, the Philippines, Thailand, and a very strong and tough Turkish brigade group. Initially, Britain promised to put together a complete brigade group and started to get this ready. But the appeal went out for speed, and so 2 battalions were hastily brought up to strength in Hong Kong. The 1st Battalion, the Middlesex Regiment, and the 1st Battalion of the Argyll and Southern Highlanders landed with a small brigade headquarters and calling themselves 27 Brigade, landed in Korea on the 29th of August and were immediately under American command, fighting hard and suffering heavy casualties. One of the earliest tragedies of the war was a company of the Argylls napalmed by mistaken identification panels. Then General MacArthur we rehearsed this beautifully, and now I'll be okay. You with a click? Okay, I'll say next slide, please, every now and again. General MacArthur, the Supreme Commander, a brilliant marine attack on Incheon, recaptured Seoul and moved right up. Got permission to cross the 38th parallel. This permission, grudgingly granted by President Truman, but General MacArthur, a very strong character, determined actually to move right up and possibly conquer China as well in support of General Chiang Kai-shek. 27 Brigade were moved up from the Pusan perimeter and went right up to the Yalu River, the border with Manchuria. Next slide, please. Can you do it? Yes, sir. The main People's Liberation Army attack on the 27th of November. I'm afraid General MacArthur's intelligence officers, as my friend Brown Parrott will confirm, liked to please their master and were not willing to give him bad news. Therefore, the large American forces were taken by surprise. Our own 29 Brigade had just about moved up north of Pyongyang when the big bug out started and the Chinese People's Army forced the Allied forces down over the Han River to a position south of Seoul. And at this time, a strong rearguard action was fought in Happy Valley, just north of Seoul, by a British battalion, the Royal Ulster Rifles, which enabled other forces to get back over the Han River before the bridges were blown. And our sister regiment lost 8 Cromwell tanks in that action. The 8th Hussars had a wreckage group of 10 Cromwell tanks, and they were captured, and most of the crews either killed or taken as prisoners of war. Can we go on now? Now this, we're reverting now to home troops. This is A Squadron, the 5th Royal Inniskilling Dragoon Guards. Now in the centre is our squadron leader, Gilbert Monckton. He got an MC fighting back in the British Expeditionary Force in 1940, escaped through Dunkirk, or moved back through Dunkirk, and then fought in North Africa and with distinction On his left is Sergeant Major Clayton, who got a military medal after D-Day with the regiment. And it's a funny old thing, us British Army regiments. This was 1950. Sergeant Major Clayton was in a horse cavalry regiment in 1937, which after all is not all that long before, when the Skins lost their horses in Colchester and were mechanised and then fought through the Second World War in tanks. Extremely youthful self is there somewhere, but most of the front rank have been in the war or were young officers. A lot of the others are national servicemen. National service was 18 months before the Korean War, but it was extended to 2 years in order that our army, which was, although it was 400,000 strong at that time, we still had, of course, residual commitments around the world, in Hong Kong, in Singapore, and in Malaysia, and in Kenya, and elsewhere. And so it was a struggle for Britain to produce the extra troops needed to fulfill the United Nations commitment. Next, we go on to a rather sad picture of us in Aldershot, coming back from a church service to mark our departure. And in the front row there's myself, Jeremy Phelps, and Andrew Albrecht, who I'm afraid we left in Korea. Let's go on next. While we were getting aboard ship, 29 Brigade were clearing the demarcation line, because we'd gone through the stages of the Korean War. I've missed out the Imjin battle, where of course there were heavy losses, but a major thrust in the British sector was resisted, and I left out the Kapyong battle to the right, where again British and Canadian troops were involved. I've left out the fact that the Commonwealth Division was formed in July 1951, and I have not mentioned that the ceasefire talks started at Kaesong in the summer of 1951. This action, Operation Commando, was to settle the final demarcation line so that with the threat from the Chinese troops still very strong, we were in satisfactory defensive positions to maintain the line whilst the peace talks continued. And in fact, if you look down to 8th and 8th Hussars and the Shropshire Light Infantry, there were battles right up north which were repulsed by the Chinese with losses, and the final line was along by Hill 227 and Hill 355 to the right of it, which will occur later on in the narrative. If we can go on now, we see the General Castles, who commanded with great distinction the Commonwealth Division on the right, an ex-Seaforth Highlander. He commanded troops in the Rhine crossing in the Second World War, and he's with the ebullient character Sir Guy Lowber Bart, who commanded the 8th Hussars with great panache, and the signal sergeant looking rather baffled between those two. And if we go on, here are our predecessors fighting for that final position which we needed to hold in order to have a satisfactory situation on the ceasefire. And a couple more slides now. These again are 8th Hussars in action in that Operation Commando. And on and on. This is then being resupplied by a whole column of South Korean porters who were recruited and did absolute wonders as supply train in very difficult terrain. One more 8th Hussar picture, or two more. That's them coming back over the River Imjin with a whole lot of Aussies on board. Next one. Now we've got off our troop ship 5 weeks, calling in at Port Said, Aden, Colombo, Singapore, Hong Kong, and arrived feeling rather seasick in Busan on the 5th of December 1951. And this is my tank, which is called after a racehorse, because the 8th Hussars were very keen on their racing. It's called Everton Knoll. Troop hated it. When we got a new tank, it was called Armadillo, which they thought was more appropriate. But snowy, and this was before Christmas. After Christmas, we went up into the line, and it got colder and colder and colder. He's got bare hands, Trooper Bell. If you touched your tank later on, your hands froze to it, and you became a casualty. And we had to be very careful. We had to move the tanks through the night every hour, so that the moisture in the tracks didn't freeze up and make us an immobile rather than a mobile weapon of war. Now we were in reserve to begin with, now we're moving up into the line. And here we are, and we split out, and my troop of 4 tanks went and worked with the 3rd Battalion of the Royal Australian Regiment, who had been very blooded in Operation Commando, had lost a lot of people, but fought with great success. On again, crossing the River Imjin. We'd been in reserve south of the river, and low water, you could ford the Imjin. At high water, it went up almost as high as the Pintail Bridge, which you see built by engineers in the background. On now, I was on a hill with a company of these Australians, and it was really rather like 1418 trench warfare, but on hills. And what did they do? We were under American command, and quite rightly, Arn Michael Daniel, the corps commander, didn't want the Chinese to think that while the peace talks were going on, we'd a walkover. So patrols were sent out every night. There were attempts to capture prisoners, and the war was kept alive in that way. Shells came in from the opposition and caused casualties. If you moved out in unknown country, you were liable to walk on a mine. And in fact, I commanded 1st Troop A Squadron, 2nd Troop A Squadron, all 4 crew commanders on a recce. The troop leader, Fergie Sunderland, had a leg amputated, and his 3 other crew commanders were wounded in a minefield which was totally unmarked. We go on now quickly to, that's me in a tank, you know how much of that. That's me writing letters when we're in reserve. Next one, this is the company commander of the Australians and I pointing out where his patrols would go that night so that we could direct tank fire on chosen targets to support them. We were equipped with probably Britain's best tank. We had Moldy tanks in the war. We eventually produced the Centurion with a 20-pounder gun. We take these tanks over from the 8th Hussars, and the gunnery system was absolutely perfect. You could set your target, set your gun on dials and chronometers in the day, and if target Bravo was called at midnight by a patrol which was out in no man's land, you could guarantee to put fire down on that spot which they called for with no worry on their side. Now I'm going to go on and just show, this is the sort of battle area on the side of Hill 355, Khawang Sang. And on that ridge you see, running actually from north to south in this aerial photograph, are 3 of my tanks, and the troop leader's tank is on the ridge behind. That was the way we were told to do it. I wasn't being chicken or anything like that. But to keep the war going, as I've said, the Corps Commander, Michael Daniel, a fighting American soldier and a distinguished World War II hero, demanded patrolling and small attacks. And in the next slide, you see a company, the officers of a company of the 1st Battalion Royal Australian Regiment, which I was supporting, and the company commander's giving his orders, and away on the right is myself as the troop leader in support, prepared to support their attack on this pimple, which was the Hill 227. Now the pimple was absolutely burrowed full of Chinamen, and these attacks, it's one of the tragedies of war, were ordered one after the other, and I supported first this battalion, then the Leicestershire Regiment, and then the Welsh Regiment to do these ordered attacks. Our General Castles, tried to reason with Michael Daniel, but to little effect. He wanted to keep things going, and that was the ethos of the day. So each time, up went a company, out from their holes came the Chinamen. We fired at the holes as they appeared, but each time, I'm afraid, 7 or 8 people were killed, and 14 or 15 people came back on stretchers. So this is the unpleasant face of war. Next one is my tank on that particular position. The next, we just have some fairly cheerful pictures of the crews behind their tanks. You can see how they were positioned and dug into hilltop positions. And then we get to 1st Troop Ace Corps playing shinty. We were supposed to be an Irish regiment. We have very few Irishmen, but shinty is a great Irish game. And so somebody sent out all these sticks, and so we were banging pucks around on an icy frozen bit of ground at that time. This just emphasises that here's Australians having a little bit of anti-bug treatment. You'll realise that in this war, we were all entitled to 3 days R&R in Japan, but otherwise you lived in the field, in our case, in shelters either under our tank or beside our tank when we were in the line, and our washing was in a shower unit, which was pretty ineffectual, where you handed in your clothes and you get other clean sort of shirts and underclothes handed to you. It was quite rough living for a whole year, and we were quite a long way from home. Now let's get now on to Korea today. This is a picture of the United Nations Cemetery, beautifully kept at Busan. And I was there in 2007 with members of the audience. And on to the next slide. This sadly is where Andrew Albright lies. And we, the British contingent, left over 1,000 in this cemetery. And we must remember that in this savage war, many more were wounded, and nearly 2,000 were taken as prisoners of war and had a very unpleasant time being indoctrinated in communist doctrine for quite a long time. On we go. Seoul today, taken from the Lotte World Hotel, and what a contrast to the place we drove through in jeeps when it was flat. The Han River is next. There are now 25 bridges over the Han River. In our day, there was a wrecked railway bridge and a Royal Engineer, American Engineer bridge, which had to be blown when communist forces came down from the north. Next one, on our visit, one of the veterans who came with us was in the Royal Fusiliers. He was captured, and he is on the Freedom Bridge, where the prisoners taken by the Chinese communists were released in Operation Big Switch between the 5th of August and the 6th of September 1953, shortly after the ceasefire. One more, that's our Hill 355, which was, I sat on the edge of, taken in 5 years ago on my revisit from the demarcation line. And then just the way the Koreans thank us, here we were parading on with the next one by the hill where the Gloucester Battalion held but lost 3/4 of their strength, killed or captured. This is there we are. Mr. Warwick Morris reviewed us, he is here, before we marched down to the ceremony at Solmaree. And finally, a picture of us being feted at a banquet, us revisiting people in the Lotte World Hotel by the Minister of, Korean Minister of Pensions and Veterans Affairs. The gratitude of the Korean people is absolutely outstanding. Revisits take place every year, and of course so many things are going just on at the moment here in London that were almost overwhelmed. Concerts and messages of goodwill from both the past Ambassador, Ambassador Park, who's just left, and I'm being honoured to meet the new ambassador on Friday, though he's only been in post for, well, since Saturday, I think. I'm afraid I've gone on too long. We have this service of remembrance which the Ministry of Defence are, as it were, giving to the Korean veterans on next Thursday, the 11th. We parade on horse guards. About 300 of us are able to march, and about 900 will be in Westminster Abbey for a service taken by the Duke of Gloucester. And we're very honoured that the Korean ambassador will be present, and we hope will give a message from the Korean president, and a number of people from the embassy will be guests of the Ministry of Defence on that occasion. We are full of admiration for the way Korea has become one of the G20 nations, 12th probably wealthiest nation in the world, and not only enjoying the wealth which they've earned, but giving, in that they are supporting all sorts of charities operating in less fortunate countries. And we salute Korea for the recovery and for their benevolent work on the world stage. I'm afraid I've gone on too long.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, Captain Park.
Thank you. Thank you, Major General, for your practical thought on Korea. As a soldier, I am very Korean, very much, and very much we owe to those veterans like General Swindles who fought in the name of freedom for the Korean people. Even after 60 years of ceasefire of the Korean War, we never forget those veterans and their sacrifice. I sometimes imagine what happens if the Koreans fall in the communist nations. There should be absolutely no the collapsed and Samsung industries and some other things. And there's no liberal democracy and the capitalist market economy. I imagine that many of you have a vested interest in Korea and also have been to Korea for holidays or working reason or so on. But perhaps many of you yet to come across the security environment and defense policy in which we live. And it's my privilege to stand here in front of you and talk about our security environment and current defense policy. And the order of content, as you see, is the security environment of Northeast Asia and the Northern situation in the threat and defense policy of the Republic of Korea, and finally, UK allocate defense coverage. There are 6 countries in Northeast Asia: Russia, China, Japan, and South and North Korea, and Taiwan. So this region accounts for 34% of the world population, 26% of the world GDP, and 34% of world trade, worldwide trade, and 20% of world's defense budget. But if you include the United States presence in the Northeast Asia, the region would account for more than 50% of the world's defense budget and the GDP. So I'm talking about the national powers surrounding the Korean Peninsula. As you can see, the Korean Peninsula is surrounded by some of the most powerful nations in the world. US absolutely is the #1 in GDP, military expenditure GDP, nuclear arsenal #1, and CNC stands for the Composite Index of National Power. It indicates that the strength of each nation based on its territorial size, population, urbanization, and the natural resource. So if we use the CINC, the China becomes the leading nation in the world. And Russia is a nuclear arsenals #2 and CINC #4. Japan, GDP #3. So the problem is each of these nations have different political aims and issues. Generally speaking, no other nations except for Korea have been under geopolitical pressures in recent years. Given our geopolitical location, some may view this as a great threat to Korea's survival and existence. But others may view this as a great opportunity to access the huge market, investment, and technology. So both perspective is right. Korea has to deal with the neighboring countries very wisely and professionally to ensure that the survival and prosperity. As you see, Korea is a nation divided into, and each has extremely different political and economic system that led to different perspectives and ways of life, to say the least. North Korea is internationally isolated and runs a communist state which is not known anywhere else in the world. North Korea's national ideology, Juche, is a mixture of a Marx-Leninist with indigenous Confucian ideology designed to legitimize and consolidate the Kim Il-sung's dynasty, a revival of absolute monarchies in the 21st century. We know that by all accounts that North Korea is very close to a failed state. In fact, 10 days ago,
the U.S. diplomatic magazine, the Foreign Policy, ranks the North Korea is the 23rd of the 978 countries in the failed state index. This is because of the totalitarian state the North Koreans run, where there are no freedom to move or to speak. And by contrast, South Korea becomes one of the most advanced democratic country in the world, market economy, and the 13th largest economy, and the military expenditure is 9th place, but non-nuclear. So it's very difficult to find out any correct evidence or information about the North Korean military expenditure and the nuclear arsenal. We have a still conflicting view of this. And we just try to estimate with the information available at hand, and just estimate, but with greater error, sometimes yes. I will explain some more about the later. And security environment of Northeast Asia, we have two opposite trends, opportunities and challenges. This coexist in the Northeast Asia region. We all share common goals to work closely together for the region's peace and prosperity. But at the same time, like the early 20th centuries, we may continue to have a regional conflict and difference. Pictures you show on the projectors are the palace of Korea and the Tiananmen main gate of the palace of China, and the Buddhist temple of Japan is called Kinkakuji. So all these shows very cultural similarities. And as of the last year, the China, Japan, and Korea are now the second, fourth, and eighth largest international trading partner in the world. We work closely together to develop skills and knowledge within the region. China is now the largest importer and exporter to Korea, whereas we are the second largest importer to Japan, and Japan is our third largest exporter. We are heavily economically interdependent. As you can see in the pictures, we are currently working on the free trade agreement between the states to bring in more property and growth in the region. On 8th May, our president held a meeting with the President of the United States in Washington, and subsequent the meeting took place the Chinese President Mr. Xi Jinping and Mr. Obama. Following that, our president visited Beijing and held a meeting with Mr. Xi Jinping last week. This is the great evidence of efforts to control dispute in Northeast Asia. Especially, all heads of states agreed to non-nuclearization of Korean Peninsula.
I just wanted to ask, how did you manage to refit the tanks if they were in that kind of environment?
We were supported by normally an armoured regiment in those days had a light aid detachment. We were given a heavy aid detachment which had additional resources and a sufficient number of tank engines, gun barrels and other parts were set up in the initial creation of the 29th Armoured Brigade, really to keep those tanks on the road. And the 8th Hussars moving right up to Pyongyang and then back down again gave them a heavy time, but the support was there, the REME support was there in order to change engines and change all other components. We lost some tanks which had to be destroyed because they toppled over hillsides, and the gun control equipment in the Centurion at that time was graded as highly secret because it was, for the first time, there was a stabilized system which enabled the tank to fire on the move and retain the gun barrel on the target on the move. And this was thought to be a target for, shall we say, Cold War intelligence people. And at one time, a squadron of the 8th Hussars were going to be sent back to Japan because they were worried that, well, the Chinese were going to overrun the peninsula, and these tanks were actually on the ship when they were called back again after the Chinese attack was held south of Seoul on that second advance in January 1951.
May I ask, when China got involved in the Korean War 60 years ago, there must have been a great fear that World War III could be triggered. And I wonder if the American strategy had considered using nuclear weapons against China as they had against Japan only 5 years previously. And why did they not do that to bring a quick end to the conflict? Was it because the stakes were simply too high and that China was such a big country and Russia was also involved in a very complex mixture of powers? I mean, it's enormously complex to consider it now, and it's complex today. It seems to be one of those problems in the world that seems to have no solution in human terms, how we can get through this except by holding the balance of power, because nobody wants to use nuclear weapons, but that's the gun that North Korea is holding to the head of the world in terms of, you know, the threat that the prevailing peace could be destroyed. So how did it seem then, Major General? How did you see the situation in terms of a quick settlement through the use of nuclear power?
As a 21-year-old, of course, I don't think about it very much. But the story of the General MacArthur's change, really, from being the winner of the Pacific War and then the person who thought that he would bring Japan back as a country. He was heavily involved in the setting up a proper government in Japan, when he, as the Supreme Commander, was taken by surprise on the 25th of June 1950 when North Korea invaded, and he hadn't listened to his intelligencers who said this was going to happen. He then, if you read the many books on the subject, one by Halberstam, how he wanted to support Chiang Kai-shek on an attack into China, and Truman was having with his advisors to restrain this Supreme Commander who'd got out of control, had moved over the 38th parallel almost without permission, but he did get permission, was right up on the Yalu River and was talking about using nuclear weapons. Then I think the statesmen of the world came into the position, and MacArthur was removed from his post, and General Ridgway took over operations in the Korean Peninsula, because there was a danger in Truman's mind that this once brilliant general had got an attack of megalomania and was going to start a world war. I don't know if that's enough. I mean, it's many academics, you may yourself be an academic for all I know, have studied this problem and written about it. And Perhaps I could just ask my friend Brian Parrott if he'd like to add anything to that, because you've done a study of the intelligence in the Korean War and post-Korean War. Is that unfair, Brian?
No, thank you, General. First of all, may I congratulate you on your talk. The General didn't touch on the fact that this is terrible tank country. Tanks are used for big open places, they were confined to narrow roads, and had to therefore work with great individual bravery. And the two Irish regiments came up with great gallantry in that very difficult situation. The question of MacArthur and whether they should go over the yellow and use nuclear weapons is quite different today. Generals at that time were used to doing big hands in big maps. You swung right through North Africa, up Sicily and Italy. You swung through Normandy and Belgium and up to Germany. You came through Indonesia up into Japan. It didn't seem to him to be a great deal to sweep up into China that we would see today. And he was planning to attack Japan, which he knew would be thousands of lives lost, not only in the Allies but in the Chinese, and it had been successful. 2 bombs saved, and although there are a lot of moral issues now, 2 bombs saved a lot of lives. So his view was that if we did use nuclear weapons, and we combined it, as the General said, with an attack by Chiang Kai-shek, we could defeat Mao Zedong, who'd only been in power for less than a year, from October in Tiananmen Square, and then we could put back into Peking a government which was sympathetic to the West. As the General said, that his military aspirations were absolutely rejected by the statesmen, not only of the United States and the United Kingdom, but the whole world. And they had this strange situation of they never bombed Busan. If they'd have bombed Busan, it would have been desperate. We never bombed into China. MacArthur was furious because they didn't bomb the bridges that brought all the resupplies over. There were no Chinese soldiers in Korea. There were how many thousands of volunteers. There were no Russians in China, in Korea, except for that large number in the Air Force. So it was an all phony war, but the basic thing was the West would not tolerate using nuclear weapons or atomic bombs, which would bring everybody else into conflict. You showed the picture of our Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary. They clearly gave the impression that they were worried that the North might use nuclear weapons. Was the feeling in Seoul and in South Korean people that North Korea might actually use atomic weapon or nuclear weapon?
Well, Korea, well, actually, you see that the television, the very peaceful scenes in Seoul capital cities when the North Koreans made a block threatening, very, very high level threatening. But that means that we actually get used to this kind of threat for more than 60 years. So as I told us, there are 470 times of military provocation in 1960, in the late of 1960s. And North Korea actually sent a company troops to the eastern coast of our territories, landing them, and their guerrilla wars then lasted almost 3 months or 4 months. And the early days in the 1969, I remember it's January 21st, that platoon 30, the commando actually penetrated the DMZ, and they came down to the Blue House, residence of the president, and almost succeeded in killing the president and his family. That was very representative. And most recent examples, as I showed, the surprise attack on Cheonan and bombardment of Yongbyon and nuclear test, and all these things. But these things is not a massive war. It's kind of a very rather local ones. So people easily forget that. And we know that it's very difficult to wage war in this situation. That they know that the primary goals that I think now is that to preserve that regime survivors. But the problem is there is no clear boundaries between the regime survival and the maximization of national interest. If they think they ensure the regime survival, then they expand their logic of nuclear development to get more things from the United States and Korea. So this is why we demand that the nuclearizations before we sign of the peace treaty or other things. And so that we not believe it because there will be the suicide. And you know that sometimes I am afraid of a situation in which nobody can deter the war. If they provoke first, and the level of provoke is very severe one, and even though our president or even the opposition leaders in party politics, they may lost their grounds to deter the war, and they automatically dragged into the war. And I'm really afraid of this kind of situations. But that's why we always try to engage with North Korea to establish some kind of the communication lines between the high levels, so that that's clearing the misunderstanding.
I'd like to ask one question. When, at the end of World War II, when arbitrarily two foreign powers demarcated the difference between North and South Korea, how did the Korean people feel that two foreign powers had sliced up their country into North and South? Shall I start? From my reading of the situation in the Korean Peninsula under Japanese rule, the Korean people had been subjugated by their Japanese masters. The Japanese language was imposed on the people, and when the Americans came to Incheon after 1945, they were greeted by a group of Japanese officials wearing morning coats and top hats, who took the surrender of that particular area on their shoulders. Such was the An rule which they'd imposed on the country, with that old-fashioned Japanese formal manner. And so in the 5 years, I have read that Stalin and Churchill and Roosevelt at the Yalta Conference didn't actually agree on the future of the Far East, because Churchill himself was not particularly interested in any British influence beyond Hong Kong. And therefore a private arrangement was made, I read in the history books, between the Americans and the Russians, which Churchill knew nothing about, which dealt with a sort of arrangement, once the Japanese war was over, of influence in the Korean Peninsula. Then when the bombs were dropped, of course Russia and America were the two partners who had to deal with this, and a very hasty conference was made, and a rather junior officer drew this line on the 38th parallel, which demarcated North and South Korea. And it's just one of the wonders of history that things worked like that. Then the Russian army had moved into North Korea, and the Americans had many things on their plate in Japan, but they were forced to produce an army in South Korea and to help the South Koreans to raise their own defense forces, but perhaps didn't put as much emphasis on doing so as did the Soviet bloc, with Stalin and Mao in partnership wishing to spread communism throughout the whole of the Pacific region. Does that measure up with you, sir?
Well, our fate was in the hand of mighty powers at the time. But yes, in some respect, yes. But at the same time, those regimes backed by the Soviet Union at the time, Kim Il-sung, his ideology and his policy actually is that we cannot accept that once. And we are South Koreans, the leaders who fought Japan during the colonial era. And they are, we call it founding fathers, including founding fathers. They introduced some Western-style political system and market economy. And the North Koreans, those leaders backed by the Soviet Union, introduced the communist ideology and the things. So this is that great, confrontation just after the independence. And normally, these things happens in any other countries in the third world. So problem is we didn't deal this very wisely, and especially those North Koreans, they injected, imposed the communist ideology. So 1 million North Koreans who have some farms and some middle levels, the workers, they actually defected to South Korea because these communists never allowed a private position. And so this increased the very high tensions between two Koreas. It actually begins by the mighty powers, but the later times it becomes a very high confrontation between Koreas. So Korean is very mixture of characters that sometimes we compare the Korean War with the American Civil War. But difference is that it begins with some ideology differences, but later, in case of Korean Wars, it becomes more multinational, the confrontation between the Western siders and those that the communist bloc and Western bloc. So it's a mixture of the characters.